You are reading this on a normal screen, in a normal browser, on a normal day. Outside, people are going about their lives. Someone is ordering coffee. Someone is checking their bank account. Someone is watching a video of a dog doing something stupid, and laughing, and sending it to three people who will also laugh. The internet you know feels total. It feels like everything. It isn't everything. Right now, running parallel to everything you know, the news, the shopping, the social media, the emails, there is another internet. One that doesn't show up in search results. One that your browser can't find. One that has its own economy, its own laws, its own hierarchy, and its own version of justice. It has been there since before you ever went online. It will be there long after this video ends. Millions of people are using it right now, in apartments and offices and hotel rooms in every country on Earth. And most of them are not who you imagine. When you hear the words dark web, most people have heard of it. Almost nobody actually understands it. This is the dark web. And this is what your life looks like at every level inside it. Level 1. The curious. You found out about it the way most people do. A video. A Reddit thread. A friend who said, "Did you know there's a whole other internet?" and laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. You download Tor. It takes 4 minutes. You've read enough to know what Tor is. The Onion Router. A network that bounces your traffic through multiple encrypted relays around the world before it reaches its destination, so that no single point in the chain can see both where you came from and where you're going. It was built by the United States Naval Research Laboratory. The government created the tool that the government now spends billions trying to police. You find this ironic in a way you can't quite articulate. The browser opens and it looks almost normal, except the logo is an onion, and when you type your first .onion address, something shifts. The page loads slowly. Slower than anything you've used in years. That slowness is the price of the routing. Every extra second is another layer of encryption, another relay in a country you've never visited, another wall between you and anyone trying to watch. When the page finally appears, it looks like the internet did in 2003. Plain text, no ads, no recommended content sidebar, no algorithm deciding what you should want to see next. No tracking pixels quietly logging your behavior and selling it to companies whose names you've never heard. No one knows you're here. That feeling is the first thing that hooks people. Not the illegal content. Most of what exists on the dark web is mundane. Forums, whistleblower platforms, journalists communicating with sources in countries where communication is dangerous, privacy advocates. People in countries where the regular internet is censored using the only tool that lets them speak freely. The BBC has a .onion address. So does the New York Times. So does Facebook. For users in places where Facebook is blocked. The dark part of dark web is not primarily about crime. It's about the absence of surveillance. And once you've experienced that absence, once you've spent an hour online without the persistent low-grade awareness that you are being watched and cataloged and monetized, going back to the regular internet feels different. Feels like walking into a room where everyone is watching you and pretending not to. You don't find anything shocking on your first visit. You find a library of banned books. A forum for people discussing government surveillance. A chat board where people talk about privacy tools with the seriousness of people who have actual reasons to need them. A marketplace you notice but don't click into yet. You close the browser. You go back to your normal life. But you think about it that night. The fact that it exists. The fact that it's been there the whole time. The fact that the internet you thought you understood is a surface. And under that surface there are layers you haven't seen. You go back the next day. Level 2, the Lurker. You've been reading for 3 weeks now. You haven't bought anything, you haven't posted anything, you haven't created an account anywhere. You are a ghost in a world of ghosts, which is, you will come to understand, the safest way to exist in this space. The people who get caught are almost always the people who couldn't resist participating before they understood the rules. And the rules here are not written down in any single place. They are distributed across forums, across years of posts, across the accumulated hard-won knowledge of people who learned them the difficult way. You've learned things. The vocabulary first. PGP encryption. Pretty good privacy. A system for encrypting messages so that only the intended recipient can read them. Using a pair of mathematically linked keys, one public and one private. You've learned how to generate a key pair, how to share your public key, how to sign messages so recipients can verify they came from you. It took a week to understand properly. It is now second nature. Operational security. They call it OPSEC here, and people talk about it the way other communities talk about fitness routines. Constantly, obsessively, with the kind of conviction that comes from watching someone get it wrong. OPSEC is not a single thing, it is a practice. It is a way of thinking about every action in terms of what information it reveals and to whom. It is the discipline of asking, before you do anything, what does this connect to and what does that connection cost me? You've read the stories of people who got it wrong. The vendor who reused a username from his regular Reddit account, a small thing, a moment of laziness, and a federal investigator running a search found the connection in 40 minutes. The buyer who shipped to his real address because he didn't want the hassle of a pickup, caught in a controlled delivery, arrested at his own front door. The marketplace administrator who ran one of the largest illegal markets in the world for 3 years without incident and then logged in once, just once, without activating his VPN first. His real IP address appeared in a server log. 6 months later, his door came off its hinges at 5 in the morning. Once was enough. Once was always enough. You've learned that the dark web is not chaos. That's the misunderstanding people carry in from the outside. The idea that removing legal oversight produces disorder. What it actually produces is a different kind of order. One enforced not by law but by reputation, which in some ways is more rigorous. Vendors are rated after every transaction. The rating systems on the major marketplaces are more detailed than Amazon's. Buyers leave comments about shipping time, packaging quality, product accuracy, communication. A vendor with 1,000 transactions and a 4.9 rating has built something real, something that took time and consistency and the kind of reliable service that would earn a business award if the business were legal. Disputes are arbitrated. Most marketplaces have a resolution system, a third party who holds funds in escrow until both buyer and vendor confirm the transaction, and who adjudicates when they don't. Exit scammers, people who take payment and disappear, are named, tracked, warned about across multiple platforms and posts that stay up for years. It is, in its own way, a functioning society, with its own norms, its own enforcement mechanisms, its own version of consequences. The consequences are just different from the ones you grew up with. You are starting to understand how it works. Understanding is the most dangerous first step. Level 3. The buyer. You told yourself you wouldn't. Then you told yourself it was just curiosity. Then you told yourself it was just once. It doesn't matter what you told yourself. What matters is what you did. Setting it up took longer than you expected. Not the technical part. You had that. A cryptocurrency wallet running Monero, not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is traceable. The blockchain is public, and there are entire companies whose only business is analyzing transaction patterns to de-anonymize wallets. Monero was built specifically to prevent this. Its transactions are private by default. The amounts hidden, the addresses obscured. Anyone who actually knows what they're doing here uses Monero. A PGP key pair generated on a device that had never touched the internet, what they call air-gapped, isolated from any network so that no malware could intercept the key generation. The private key stored on an encrypted drive kept separate from the machine you used to access the web. The public key posted to a key server so vendors could encrypt messages that only you could read. A careful reading of the vendor's feedback history going back 18 months. Because 18 months of consistent positive feedback is the closest thing to a guarantee you'll ever find in a place with no guarantees. You cross-reference the vendor's handle across 3 different forums, checking for any mention of problems, any accusation of scammy, NG. Any change in behavior that might signal the account had been compromised or taken over by law enforcement? What they call a honeypot. A seized account operated by investigators who keep it running to catch buyers. The preparation felt excessive. It was not excessive. In this space, preparation is the difference between a transaction that completes cleanly and a knock on your door. The package arrives in a plain envelope with a foreign return address that means nothing. It looks like nothing. It weighs nothing. It is designed in every detail to look like the most boring piece of mail that has ever moved through a postal system. You hold it in your hands and feel the full weight of what you've crossed. There is a line between the person who reads about the dark web and the person who uses it. You have crossed that line. You cannot uncross it. Not because of any technical trail. You were careful, more careful than most, but because of something internal, a recalibration, of what you believe yourself capable of where your actual limits are versus where you always assumed they were. You think about this more than you expected to. Late at night, in the hours before sleep arrives, you also think about how easy it was, how smooth, how the systems that exist to catch people like you failed completely, not through any fault of the systems, but because you were careful, and the careful ones don't get caught. You think about what it means that the careful ones don't get caught. You think about what it means that the careful ones don't get caught. You think about who else is being careful. That thought is more dangerous than the first one. Level 4. The vendor. Someone on a forum asked if you could source something. You could. You didn't plan to become a vendor. Nobody plans to become a vendor. It starts as a favor, which is the way most things start, and then the favor is repeated, and then someone mentions that there's money in this. Real money, more money than you've seen from a single transaction in your regular life. And then one morning, you are setting up a shop on a marketplace. You've spent 6 months studying as a buyer, writing your first product listing with the careful, neutral language of someone who has read 1,000 product listings and knows exactly what converts. The listing matters more than people think. The tone, the specificity, the way you describe the product without describing it in ways that could be used against you, the reassurance embedded in the phrasing. Because buyers on these platforms are afraid of scammers, of law enforcement, of receiving something that isn't what they paid for. And your job as a vendor is to reduce that fear enough that they complete the transaction. The logistics are the hardest part. Not the sourcing, that's its own problem with its own solutions. The hard part is the operational chain between product and buyer. Every step is a potential point of failure, and you have to think about every step. The packaging materials, nothing that can be fingerprinted, nothing that retains DNA, nothing distinctive enough to be remembered by anyone who touched it. The postmark, not your city, not even your region if you can manage it. The return address, fictional but plausible. The name and street of a real building in a city where you've never been. The timing of drops, the accounts used to receive payment. The conversion of those payments into something you can actually spend, which is its own chain of decisions with its own risks at every link. You think about all of it all the time. It's like running a small business where every compliance failure carries mandatory prison time instead of a fine. You think about compliance the way a pilot thinks about checklists. Not because you enjoy it, but because the alternative to the checklist is unacceptable. Your ratings are good. Your customers leave detailed, almost touching feedback. People thanking you with a sincerity that feels misplaced in this context. Expressing gratitude in terms usually reserved for people who've done them genuine favors. You read it sometimes and feel something complicated. Pride at having done the thing well, dread at what the thing is, a low persistent awareness of how this ends for most people who do it long enough. You are making more money than your regular job. You have not quit your regular job. Quitting your regular job would raise questions about income that you cannot answer. You go to work every day and do the work and come home and do the other work, and the two lives sit next to each other without touching, and you maintain the separation with a discipline you didn't know you possessed. You are also sleeping less than you ever have in your life. Level 5, the hacker. You have skills that most vendors don't have. You taught yourself. This is true of almost everyone who does what you do. The formal pathways into this knowledge are limited, and the informal ones are vast. Years of forums, of capture the flag competitions where teams of anonymous strangers race to find vulnerabilities in deliberately broken systems, of building environments on your own machines, deliberately vulnerable, and then attacking them until you understood them completely, of reading documentation that wasn't written to be read by people like you, and extracting from it things the writers didn't intend to share. You understand networks the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not as a user who sees the surface, but as someone who knows what's underneath. The layers, the protocols, the ways that systems talk to each other, and the gaps in those conversations where a careful listener can hear things that weren't meant to be heard. On the dark web, technical skill is a different kind of currency. Vendors sell products, hackers sell access. And access to corporate networks, to government databases, to the kind of information that only exists behind authentication walls that someone paid a great deal of money to build, is worth more than almost anything else traded in this space. You've sold credentials, username and password combinations harvested from systems whose security was designed by people who underestimated what someone motivated and patient could do from the outside. You've sold database dumps, the complete contents of systems that held information their owners believed was safe. You've sold access itself, not data, but presence, an open door into a network, maintained invisibly, that a buyer could use for purposes you didn't ask about and mostly didn't want to know. You tell yourself, systems, not people. Data, not lives. The corporation whose network you're inside is not a person, it's an entity, an abstraction, and abstractions don't feel things. But sometimes a database contains medical records. Sometimes it contains the financial information of individuals who are not abstractions at all, but specific human beings who trusted a specific institution with specific details about their lives. Sometimes you are reading the file of a person who is sick, or in debt, or afraid, and the distance you've been maintaining, the careful conceptual separation between your work and its human consequences, collapses for a moment before you rebuild it. You rebuild it quickly. You've gotten good at that. Your reputation in technical circles is significant. People know your handle, not vendors. Vendors want product. Operators want something different, something more structural. They reach out through channels that are themselves encrypted, offering work that isn't transactional, but organizational. They don't want to buy access from you. They want you inside the organization. Level 6, the operator. Running a marketplace is not what you imagined it would be. You imagine the technical challenge, and the technical challenge is real, and you were right to respect it. The infrastructure, servers distributed across multiple jurisdictions, none of them in countries with extradition treaties that would matter, mirrored constantly so that the seizure of any single node produces no interruption of service. The security architecture that keeps law enforcement out and keeps your identity separated from the platform by enough layers that direct connection becomes not impossible in theory, but impossible in practice, which is the only kind of impossible that matters. You imagine the money, which is also real. What you didn't imagine was the human problem, which is, it turns out, the only problem that actually threatens you. You have vendors who dispute each other's territory, who claim that another vendor is selling a product they consider their exclusive market, and who bring these disputes to you with an intensity that would seem disproportionate if you didn't understand what was actually at stake, which is livelihood, which is everything. You have buyers who claim packages never arrived, some of whom are telling the truth, and some of whom are running a scam called a free ride, claiming non-delivery to get refunds for orders they received. You have to distinguish between them with incomplete information and no ability to verify anything directly. And your decisions affect real money and real people and set precedents that will be cited in the next dispute and the one after that. You have staff members you've never met. This is the part that keeps you up most nights. The people who administer the platform, who moderate disputes, who handle the technical operations that you've delegated. They exist to you only as encrypted messages and cryptocurrency transactions and the evidence of their work. You have built relationships with them over months and years, relationships of the kind that form between people who have worked together through difficulties and come to trust each other's judgment. And yet you have no way to verify that they are who they say they are, no way to confirm that they are not working for someone else, no way to know if something goes wrong, whether it was a mistake or a betrayal. Trust is always a vulnerability. In this environment, it is the only vulnerability that actually matters. The platform generates more money per day than most people earn in a year. You live modestly in a way that requires constant discipline. Spending money requires explaining where it came from, and you have no explanation that would survive scrutiny. The money accumulates in wallets that you convert slowly, carefully, through chains of transactions designed to make forensic accounting prohibitively difficult. You will have access to that money someday, maybe. 3 marketplaces similar to yours have been seized in the past 18 months. You know exactly how each one fell. One was infrastructure, a server misconfiguration that exposed a real IP address. One was human, an administrator who was identified through a pattern of forum posts going back years before the marketplace existed. One was both, a cascading failure that began with a small technical error and ended with someone deciding that cooperation was better than conviction. You have studied these failures the way a pilot studies crash reports, methodically, without the comfort of believing the crash happened to someone less careful than you. You do not intend to make the same mistakes. Intent is not the same as outcome. You know this better than almost anyone. Level 7, the fixer. You don't run anything. You don't sell anything. You don't hack anything. You solve problems. That description sounds modest. It is not modest. In an ecosystem built on anonymity, where identity cannot be verified and trust cannot be assumed and the normal mechanisms by which people hold each other accountable don't exist, the person who can bridge those gaps, who can mediate between parties who can't meet in person, verify claims that can't be verified through normal channels, find solutions to problems that officially don't exist, that person is the most valuable node in the entire network. More valuable than the operators, whose platforms can be seized. More valuable than the hackers, whose skills can be replicated. More valuable than the vendors, whose supply chains can be disrupted. Your value is relational. It lives in the connections you've built, and the reputation you've accumulated, and the judgment you've demonstrated over years of operating in a space where bad judgment has immediate and permanent consequences. You have negotiated ransoms between hacking groups and corporations who were quietly paying to have their data deleted rather than released. Corporations whose legal teams had already prepared the breach disclosure filings, who were paying not to avoid consequences, but to control the narrative, to be the ones who decided when and how the story became public. You sat in the middle of those negotiations, carrying messages between parties who couldn't communicate directly, adding and subtracting from offers, reading the temperature of both sides, knowing when to push and when to let silence do the work. You have brokered the sale of information between parties whose identities you never fully knew and whose purposes you chose not to examine too closely. You have arbitrated disputes between operators and vendors where the stakes were high enough that the alternative to your involvement was not legal action but physical action. Actual violence, delivered by actual people, against actual bodies, because the world you operate in is not purely digital, and the people in it are not purely rational. And when significant money disappears, someone always wants to know where it went. You've learned to read these situations before they reach that point, The change in tone in someone's messages, the increase in the speed of responses, the questions that are really threats, and the threats that are really requests for a way out. You've talked people back from edges that you never explicitly acknowledged were edges. You know things about the major players in this space that they don't know you know. You know things about law enforcement operations that law enforcement doesn't know you know. You exist at the intersection of multiple flows of information, and you manage that position with the care of someone who understands that the wrong word to the wrong person at the wrong moment ends everything. Knowledge is the only inventory you carry. It has no weight. It cannot be seized. It cannot be found in a search of your apartment, your devices, your car. It can, however, make you a target, not for law enforcement, who can't see you clearly enough to target you, but for the people you know things about, who are aware in a general way that you know things, and who periodically wonder exactly how much and what you would do with it if your interests ever diverged from theirs. You think about this constantly. You have thought about it so long and so thoroughly that the thinking has become part of your background process, running always, informing every interaction, every decision about what to say and what to withhold, and who to trust with which piece of what you know. This is not paranoia. This is the correct response to your actual situation. Level 8, the ghost. You have 7 identities. Not personas, not usernames. Identities, each with its own devices, purchased in cash in cities you pass through and have not returned to. Its own network infrastructure, routed differently, touching different nodes, building a pattern of traffic that an analyst would read as a different person in a different place. Its own cryptocurrency history, funded through chains that don't connect to each other or to any identity that connects to you. Its own behavioral fingerprint, the vocabulary you use, the hours you're active, the topics you engage with, the way you structure sentences, carefully differentiated and consistently maintained across years of use. Behavioral fingerprinting is the thing most people don't think about until it's too late. Stylometric analysis, the study of writing patterns, is sophisticated enough now that a sufficiently motivated analyst can link anonymous posts to known authors with meaningful confidence. The length of your sentences, the words you reach for, the punctuation habits you've carried since childhood without ever noticing them. These things are as individual as a fingerprint, and you have had to learn to suppress them deliberately when operating under identities that must remain separate. You switch between identities the way other people switch between tasks. With practice and discipline, it has become almost automatic. The identity you inhabit for a given interaction is complete. Not a mask over your real self, but a fully realized alternative, with its own history and its own way of being in this world. The discipline required to maintain the separation, never letting the habits of one identity bleed into another, never making a transaction that creates a financial bridge, never logging in from a location that could serve as a common point, never responding to a message addressed to one identity from a device associated with another, has restructured the way you think. You have become, in a measurable way, multiple people. Not in a pathological sense, in the sense that you contain multiple coherent ways of being, and you can move between them with the ease of someone who has practiced a skill for so long it no longer requires conscious effort. You are careful in ways that extend beyond the digital. You are careful about what you say to the people you know in physical life, not because you discuss your work with them. You never discuss your work with them, but because casual conversation contains information, and information creates connections, and connections are exactly what you spend your professional life preventing. You are careful about what you buy, and where, and how. Careful about the patterns of your movement, the predictability of your routine, the people who might notice your habits and remember them. Paranoia and prudence look identical from the outside. You stopped caring about the distinction a long time ago. Law enforcement knows you exist. Not you specifically. They don't have a name or a face or a location. But they know the shape of your activity. They've seen it across multiple operations, multiple jurisdictions, multiple years, and they've given it a label, a code name in a file that sits in a server in a building you've thought about but never researched, because researching it would tell someone something. The file exists. You're certain of it. You don't know how much it contains or how accurate it is. You are a ghost. The question that occupies you in the quiet hours is not whether you'll remain one. It's what it means that you've become one. Level 9. The architect. You built things that other people use without knowing you built them. The anonymization protocol that 3 of the largest active marketplaces rely on. You wrote the original code in a period of 8 months during which you barely left a rented room in a city you chose because it was unremarkable. Because unremarkable cities don't generate the kinds of records that interesting cities generate. You ate the same 3 things in rotation. You spoke to almost no one. You slept irregularly and worked in the gaps between sleep and thought about almost nothing except the problem, which was enormous and beautiful and consumed you in the way that only problems of that scale can. The escrow system that processes tens of millions in cryptocurrency annually, without a central point of failure, the architecture is yours, though it's been modified by people who don't know that. The communication layer that allows operators and vendors across multiple platforms to exchange information in a way that leaves no metadata, no timing correlation, no traffic analysis fingerprint that could be used to infer relationships. You built that from first principles because the tools that existed weren't good enough, and you needed them to be good enough. You are not famous. You will never be famous. This is not a sacrifice. It is the point. Fame in this space is a different word for exposure, and exposure is a different word for the end. The people who benefit from your work know you only as a handle that has changed 3 times over the course of a decade. They pay you in ways that would defeat any accounting. Some of them don't know they're running your code. It's been passed between hands, modified, extended, attributed to other authors in the chain of transmission. The core is yours. The architecture is yours. The thinking that made it possible came from a mind that will never be publicly connected to it. You think sometimes about what it enabled. You are technically sophisticated enough to understand in specific terms what moves through the infrastructure you designed. The drugs, the stolen data, the things that are worse than those things. You made choices about what problems to solve, and those choices had consequences for people you've never met and whose existence you can reconstruct in the abstract but not engage with directly. You have a way of not thinking about this in detail that you developed over years and that works most of the time. You are working on something new, a problem that the current architecture can't solve, a gap that you identified 6 months ago and have been circling ever since. It would make what came before look primitive. Not because you need the work. The money is no longer a motivation. Because the problem is genuinely interesting. Because it sits at the intersection of cryptography and network theory and human behavior, and you have not found anything more interesting to think about. You are aware that this is who you are at the foundation, someone who cannot leave an unsolved problem alone. That quality built everything you've built. It is probably also the thing that will eventually end it. The problem that's too interesting to leave alone is sometimes the one that's too interesting to survive. Level 10, the myth. No one is sure you exist. That is not metaphor and it is not humility. There are serious researchers, tenured academics whose work appears in peer-reviewed journals, federal investigators with decades of experience, former intelligence analysts who left government work for private firms and now spend their time on exactly this kind of question, who have debated and published papers and classified briefings whether the entity their data points toward is a single individual, a small coordinated group operating under a consistent identity across years and platforms, or a pattern that the community has collectively generated to explain anomalies that might have simpler explanations. The debate is genuine. The evidence is ambiguous by design. You have been active in various forms for over a decade. You have never been identified. You have never been meaningfully close to identified, as far as you can tell, and you have access to enough information through channels you've maintained for exactly this purpose to have a reasonably accurate picture of how close anyone has come. Not close. Not in ways that matter. You are not running anything anymore. You stopped running things years ago, at a point when you recognized that the risk curve had changed, that your continued involvement in active operations was no longer justified by the returns, that the profile you had built was becoming a liability, that the smartest move was to step back and become something harder to categorize. What you do now is harder to name. You observe. You hold knowledge. You occasionally intervene, not for money, not for loyalty to any organization or individual, but because the ecosystem you spent a decade building has developed in ways you find interesting, and your understanding of it is comprehensive enough that you can see things other people can't see. And sometimes what you see suggests that a small intervention would prevent a large problem. You intervene. Carefully. Through channels that connect to nothing that connects to you. You live quietly. The apartment is clean and plain. There is nothing in it that would interest anyone who entered it. No unusual equipment, no large amounts of cash, no obvious signs of the life you've actually lived. The devices are elsewhere. The money is in forms and locations that would take years to fully find even if someone knew exactly what to look for. The work, such as it is, happens in locations that rotate. You are 61 years old. You look older than that. The decade plus of near total operational isolation, the careful management of every relationship, every word, every connection, has done something to you that you recognize but can't fully name. A kind of calcification. A distance from ordinary human interaction that has grown so habitual it no longer feels like distance. It just feels like the way things are. You have more money than you will spend. You have influence over systems that millions of people use, influence that you exercise invisibly and that no one would trace to you. You have enemies who are serious people, who have resources, who have not forgotten that you exist even if they can't find you. And you have maintained for all these years the gap between what they know and what they need to know to actually reach you. What you don't have is simpler. You don't have someone to talk to. Not about this. There is no one in your life who knows what you actually did, what you built, what it required, what it cost. The people who knew pieces of it are gone, or distant, or know only fragments that don't assemble into the whole picture. The whole picture exists only in your memory, and your memory is the most private thing in your life, more private than any device, more encrypted than any communication. You made yourself a ghost so completely, over so many years, through so many deliberate choices, that sometimes in the early hours of the morning before the work begins, when the apartment is quiet and the light through the curtains is the particular gray of a city not yet awake, sometimes you find yourself wondering whether the ghost is all that's left of you. Whether the person who started this, who downloaded a browser out of curiosity one ordinary afternoon and felt the particular thrill of a door opening onto a world that wasn't supposed to exist, whether that person is still in here somewhere. The answer, you suspect, is yes, somewhere. But the ghost has been the surface for so long that finding what's underneath would require a kind of excavation you're not sure you know how to do anymore. And you are no longer certain that was the wrong choice, only certain that it was a choice. Made in increments, over years, each step small enough to seem reversible. None of it was reversible. That's the thing about the dark web that the stories never quite capture. Not the crime, not the money, not the technology, the irreversibility, the way each level changes you in ways you don't fully register until you're already at the next one. The way you look back from where you are and cannot find the exact moment when the person you used to be became the person you are. The moment exists. It always exists. You just can't find it anymore.